I don't know that it's more fulfilling. I would say that the topic of me going to study Zen Buddhism there was because I had my father had heart disease for 4 years between when I was 14 and 18. He died when I was 18, 1 month before I graduated high school. I was deeply traumatized by this, and I couldn't find the answers that I needed from the church at the time or other Christians around me. And so I did a huge amount of reading and research in philosophy and religion. And when there's a monk by the name of Thomas Merton, I think he's a Jesuit, and he wrote a book on Zen Buddhism. So coming from a Catholic perspective, that was my bridge into Zen Buddhism. He's also a poet, etc. I wrote poetry a lot in those days. And when I started discovering Zen Buddhism, this was way before it was popular. Let me just point that out. Like, I wasn't on any kind of bandwagon. If anything, I was a weirdo for doing that. You know, I was like strange for being interested in that. So anyway, it just was totally indigenous to me. I understood all of it completely naturally, and it completely spoke to my nature. So half of it is that, other half of it is, yes, there is, I was a young man, there's a kind of fantasy of like traveling abroad and that whole like coming of age experience. So it felt like I was becoming a man by putting myself through this experience alone, kind of like maybe some young men would go to the military. I went to Japan and studied Zen Buddhism, so it's part of the lore of Donald Kent. When I was there, so I stayed with homestay families, and I was quite deeply embedded into the actual cultural experience. But I was really intensely involved in studying the academics of Buddhism. What is it? How does it work? And then I would go to do meditation in Kyoto at a Buddhist temple once a month. And I, as best as I could at that age, going to college, I did a pretty rigorous study of Zen. So, and what it was all about, and the sort of the end of the story, so to speak, is that I built my spiritual roots. So I established my ground from which I gained my peace of mind, through which I understood a new cosmology that helped me with my grieving of my father, and that helped me with the trauma of that experience. So that's what I came for, and that's what I got, and it's something that has stayed with me for the rest of my life, and I've only built on. That's the simple answer.
That's quite interesting. And so, do you draw any parallels from Eastern sort of Buddhist philosophy and any sort and Christianity? I remember reading a book myself on Buddhism, and there was something which I thought was quite similar in the sense that it tells you to, let go of yourself and your, your flesh-filled sort of desires. I mean, that for me was a very kind of a common thread with Christianity in terms of essentially putting away the flesh that it craves, and then going after the sort of the spiritual things and seeking God, the things of the spirit.
Oh yeah. I think that, the analogy I like to use is, let's say, the gravity. Okay, and I don't know how to say gravity in French or Chinese or Latin or Russian, but it's still gravity, whatever you call it. You see my point? And it's a natural force that exists, right? So this is what God is, and God is this natural force that is cross-cultural, permeates all time, and that there are laws of nature that exist, and the more you're flowing with the laws of the cosmos, the closer you can be to God. And how do you do that? By setting yourself free from your ego. And so the ego tends to be the kind of the Jew of the mind, as I like to call it. It is the deceptor. It's the prism of all these different changeable factors that come together to create the illusion of self. You are not an illusion. You are, it's an odd thing to say. It's kind of like if you shine light through a glass of water, it'll bend the light, right? So does it exist or does it not, right? All these things, the perception of the mind, it's a big topic. So it's very difficult to answer this simply, but I think that the parallels between these two things is how I would say that Buddhism taught me the technology to become closer to God. If Buddhism had traveled west instead of east, let's say through history. Now, the Muslims stopped that. They came into India and Pakistan, Afghanistan, even down into Southeast Asia, and slaughtered all the monks and destroyed the temples and burned the books and blah blah blah. That's an aspect of history. But if somehow Buddhism had traveled to Europe, it would have a very Christian flavor to it. There would be some kind of Christian Buddhism or Buddhist Christianity, if you will. It's a type of water that just takes the form of the glass that it's in, if that makes sense. So I think that I would argue that Christians can supercharge their Christianity by practicing Zen, for example. And Zen is just a Japanese word for meditation. Well, what kind of meditation? How do you do it, and what's it for? And so that's very Buddhist right there. That question.